Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our latest rendition of our Sustainability Lunch series. Thrilled with today's turnout. Really looking forward to today's conversation, all about data-driven solutions for sustainable food systems. Before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to highlight a few upcoming events that should be on your radar. Next week, we're going to be co-hosting an event with the Food and Ag Club all about the summer internship search. And we're going to hear perspectives from current second-year MBAs about their experiences and expertise. So if you're a first-year MBA looking for an opportunity in food and ag, highly recommend attending this session next week. If you are looking for a full-time role, I think it's also very beneficial to connect with these classmates and just get to know their expertise as you consider your own job search. So the QR code is up on the screen if you want to RSVP via Sloan Groups. Awesome. And then one additional event that we are hosting later in November. So we have a panel of MIT alumni who will be sharing their stories around founding their own ventures in the renewable energy space. So we're partnering with the Sloan Energy and Climate Club on this discussion. It will be really valuable, especially if you're thinking about entrepreneurship in the renewables space. So QR code up on the screen, feel free to RSVP. Great. And before we introduce today's guest speaker, I just wanted to introduce today's student facilitator, Sam Jackstitz. Sam is a 2020, woo! Thanks, Jules. Sam is a 2025 Master's of Real Estate Development student. Sam has deep roots in agriculture and helps run his family's livestock farm in central Massachusetts. Before joining MIT, he worked as a financial data engineer for prop tech companies and private equity firms, specializing in predictive modeling, databases, and financial systems. His background is primarily in real estate, and he continues to work part-time as a consultant and project manager for agricultural transactions. Sam, thank you so much for joining. Emily, thank you so much for coming to campus. Let's welcome both of them, and then Sam, I'll kick it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just going to test. We're good. Everyone can hear perfect. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. It's great. This is my first time in Boston, which is okay to both. It's just really great. So thank you for giving me a great excuse to
Absolutely.
come see the city.
We were just talking about the Esplanade and how amazing that is. But to start, can you give an overview of where you came from, where you're at, your company right now, and specifically some of the verifications and data-centric work you do in the field?
Sure. So I'll start off with what I'm doing now at FoodChain ID. You may have never heard of FoodChain ID. I have not either before I joined FoodChain ID. But if you've ever seen the butterfly, the non-GMO project butterfly logo on any of your food, that is a logo and certification that FoodChain helped develop and roll out, as well as many other food certifications, verification activities. So it's a global company focused on food certifications. So organics, deforestation-free, biodiversity certifications, animal welfare, any type of certifications that relate to the food and ag industry, really. Now, the other aspect, and this is where I come in as the technical director for sustainability, is our sustainability portfolio. So this is where we focus on carbon claims, whether offsets or insets, or other specific programs within that companies want to roll out. We also have certifications around regenerative agriculture, both for organic systems and organic systems as well as conventional systems as well. So that's my role. I sit in the US. I sit outside of Philadelphia, but lead a global team. Our primary offices are multiple in the US, Brazil. Actually, over 90% of the non-GMO soy coming from Brazil into Europe is certified by FoodChain ID. So really a massive footprint on the industry. Multiple locations throughout Europe, and India is one of our largest offices as well. So really a big global footprint, which has been really interesting. So let me take a step back of how I got here. So I grew up in a farm, and I was not even going to go to college. We'll take it way back. Not even going to go to college. I was bound to be an equestrian Olympian. Right, that was my goal. But parents were like, you just you have to go. So I did. I went to Penn State, and I focused on agricultural education, but with an overlay in international development. Then went to do a master's in the same field. My master's, I worked in Mozambique with a USAID project during that time. And then later, after I graduated with my master's, spent a few years working again for a USAID project in Rwanda, which was a public-private partnership with Tyson Foods, working on smallholder poultry systems. I really enjoyed international development. I really enjoyed the social sciences work and the community development, farmer livelihood, but I became really interested in the data collection. We were collecting all this data on these projects and not doing much of it with it, to be honest. It was messy, it was not doing much of it. So that's where I then went to Cornell to do a PhD in soil and crop sciences with a focus on data science. And a focus on sustainability and climate specifically. So my PhD was focused on rice wheat systems in India, and I did activities from biogeochemical-based process modeling, household surveys, developing out machine learning algorithms, and then also using a variety of data assets and data stacks to essentially quantify sustainability outcomes across agricultural systems and across landscapes. So that's where I am now.
Well, you mentioned kind of the elephant in the room, which I think we could go into for an entire day. So we'll try to keep it limited, but carbon as a whole and on a macro scale. How do you see the trends in tracking, measuring, quantifying carbon as a whole? If you look back, I mean, for the past 10 years, it's really seen a lot of dynamic changes in that it used to be pretty easy for companies to just pay a lump sum, buy some land and call it a day. But now there's a lot more predictive modeling that's going into how carbon's understood from a government company perspective. What do you see in the field of carbon?
Yeah, so right now it's an interesting space, particularly in the food and ag sector. We are going from this carbon really being these offset programs where carbon credits are generated from a variety of methodologies, whether it's from some of the legacy registries such as Vera or Gold Standard, or from some of the newer innovative or specialty type registries, and now moving more towards offsets and carbon optimization and carbon balance. So that's one major trend that we're seeing in the industry. Of course, offsets still have a very important role in the food and agriculture space, but we're moving in that direction. The other interesting component from a carbon perspective in the food and ag space is we work with some of the largest CPG companies, food and ag companies, small ones as well, some of them more advanced than others, of tracking their emissions and making ambitious targets and implementing programs to reduce emissions. Many of them have been focused on, of course, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and working with some of the big firms, consulting firms, engineering, energy firms to quantify and making really great progress in those areas. Now they're in a Scope 3 world where these energy firms, these firms are helping them understand where they're at from a carbon perspective on Scope 3. But when it comes to land systems and agricultural systems, it's complex. Like for those of you who are working in these systems, I mean, there's so many drivers in these systems. We're dealing with real natural systems that are highly variable based on soil type, based on crop management, climate, and the outcomes of these systems are really difficult to quantify. And so that's where more and more of these companies are saying, wow, we need to bring on some specialists to figure this out. And that's where we've helped them from an advisory arm, and then later a separate arm to then verify that those claims that they're making are legitimate and real, really.
Interesting. And so that's just on the environmental aspect. And so if you think of an ESG, do you track data on the SG part, not just the environmental part? Or is that a lot trickier? As you said, it's so layered, it's so difficult to get different data.
We do both. And just to be clear, we're not the ones collecting data. So our clients provide us with that data, whether it's social related data or environmental related data. Now we do suggest partners that they could use to get them where they want to go, and ideally have that data organized and transparent and reproducible, or at least their quantifications with that data and predictions with that data that we can then verify off of. So that is one piece there. So yeah, we do work with a variety of partners, a variety of data assets, and that can really look different from the social. Getting back to the social aspect, there's a variety of certifications, like Fair TSA is one of them. So for example, systems, and we work with a lot of project and producers or companies and producers in India that are exporting organic sugar, conventional sugar, cotton. The textile industry is really focused, of course, on the issues around social equity, as well as environment as well. So those are areas that then, yes, we layer on the social environment and really bring that together and track those things together too.
That's a hurdle unto itself to combine them all. And we've talked a little bit on the side. When you're combining all this data and you're looking at everything that's being tracked, how do you define, and this is a big question, so take it however you want, how do you define sustainability? Because there's so many fronts to define sustainability, and companies can say, we need to be profitable. A lot of the companies we work for, they need to maximize shareholder value. Maybe they need to do different objectives, but how do you take all this data, whether it be in E, S, or G, or all three, and how do you say, here's what you can do, and here's how you can be the most sustainable in this maximization function? And that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit, yes, there are standards out there and programs to define this, right? We have the SBTI framework, we have the GHG protocol frameworks, right? We have these frameworks to provide this consistency and to provide definitions around this. For us as verifiers, what we care about is that they did what they said they did, which means no matter which protocol and methodology claim they're making, and some claims are better than others, right? We're not maybe putting that judgment call, because we also know people need an entry point. Companies need an entry point. They got to start somewhere, and it's better for them to start. So if those claims are there, as long as they're transparent and they're very clear on what they're claiming and how they've got to those conclusions, we can then, no matter how they're defining it, we can then verify and say, yes, that's real, legitimate. And by the way, that verification looks like, from a practical standpoint, because you're probably thinking, like, what does this actually look like? If we're looking at, let's say, a ketchup manufacturer, we look all the way down to the field level. We take that data from the field level and provide audits via desk review. So we have a team that's combined of multiple scientists, including agronomists, soil scientists, GHG accounting experts, data experts, and we provide a value judgment on that desk review, and then we visit a subset, generally around a square root of those farms, actually go on site to say, do things actually line up here? And that's where we also check some other things. So for example, we just sent some auditors in Brazil on a project, and we realized there was some undocumented workers that were not on the proper payroll system and properly documented. And so that would be on the payroll and tax, and essentially they are not given their full rights. And so that was something that, maybe we were really focused on the GHG accounting, but if you're not paying attention to these legality aspects in the country that you're working in or area, right, that's where being in person is really, really important.
Interesting. And so obviously it's easy to have too few data points. Do you ever see it where someone has too much data?
Yeah, so, okay, my favorite phrase of my PhD from one of my professors that I really respect is, not everything that can be measured should be measured. We, in this room, like we are so ambitious, well, in theory, like sometimes I'm not, but like we're ambitious. We want accuracy. We want the best of the best. And I recently actually it's a company involved in the livestock sector. I mean, the most beautiful data. They went into this one region in Brazil and just collected just everything you could on sustainability on the farm. I mean, it was just the amount of data collection effort and management for that is great. Then they're taking that one area and extrapolating those results to their entire supply shed across multiple regions and biomes of Brazil. Right? And it's like, no, what if we need to rethink this and think about what matters, what indicators do we want to, what outcomes do we actually care about, and assign metrics that are appropriate for those indicators. And some of those will be proxy. Sometimes we use soil organic carbon as a proxy for other other changes in soil health. And so we've done a lot of helping these companies think about, okay, if we're going to scale this, what matters? What can we perhaps decrease our level of accuracy at the farm level to reduce uncertainty at the regional level? And so that's been really helpful. And most of the time, companies are like, great. You mean great, this is easier. I mean, not necessarily, but right, that's so important that we prioritize and think very strategically about what we're collecting and why. And for you, many of you working on research projects and looking at consulting jobs or even working within your startup and trying to prove the claims that you're trying to make around sustainability, what can you focus on that's going to get you the 80% there? And then how can you maybe quantify your uncertainty and help that to be scalable?
Do you see that often where there are people that are overfitting models like they did in Brazil, or is that kind of an edge case?
I would say it happens. It does happen. I wouldn't say like does it happen in all, like I can't say the majority of the time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we're seeing, and you probably all are seeing this as well, depending on your field, is in the last 2 years, right, with this explosion of AI tools, with the amount of availability of secondary publicly available imagery, remote sensing, satellite imagery, we have startup and algorithm this and out for everything, right? And there's so much out there, which is wonderful, but also now we have to, as people who are now practitioners in the sustainability space, we need to be more rigorous than ever in understanding how those models were trained, how those models were validated, and if they're fit for purpose. Because it could be a wonderful model, 1 + 1 = 2. Awesome, everything like quantitatively, right there. But then is it applied for the appropriate situation? If we train and validate a model in cotton in Georgia, can we use that model? Can we use that model in surrounding states? Maybe, but maybe not. Can we use that model in India? Again, right? These models are fit for purpose, and it requires us as practitioners to be really, really clear on what we're looking for. And if we don't have the answers, there's a lot of answers I don't have. Call in the right people. This is where your buddies really help.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about some of the algorithms? Because it's actually not really large language models. You're doing more of KNN decision trees, and I would imagine more on the quantitative side. Is that correct?
Yes. And again, this isn't us necessarily performing these.
Right, but as a verifier, what?
So a lot of what we're seeing from, and I'll focus a bit on soil organic carbon, and mainly because that's my bias and that has been my technical focus, is even soil organic carbon, which we know if this is a field right here, we know this measurement's going to be very different than that measurement, which is going to be very different than that measurement than that was last week, right? And so quantifying soil carbon across space is very challenging. So if we're thinking about modeling that, a model is a perfect example to quantify across space and time, And so we have a variety of approaches. We have our process-based models. So these are essentially, just to break that down for those that might not be familiar. So you have your biogeochemical process-based models that the equations within that model mimic the biogeochemical processes to derive the outcomes, where then you have your data-driven models saying, okay, we have all these measurements. Those insights from the data-driven models are going to be different than your process-based models. And then you have your kind of a mixture of techniques where you're using a bit of both. And then you also have, you can measure that soil carbon, take that measurement, you can then take it to a lab. In that lab, you can do typical dry combustion measurements, you can do spectroscopy, or you can do spectroscopy in the field measurements. You can then relate that to data stacks of from satellite imagery, right? And so it's like, it's almost thinking about how the modeling approach, what kind of data insights, what kind of data assets are you using? And is that appropriate for the outcomes and the predictions and the insights that you're getting, and making sure that's matched?
And do you ever push back on, whoever you may be auditing, verifying, and saying, actually, if we had this data, it would provide a lot more insight to whether or not we could certify you? Or does that rarely happen? You see that you really have to push back on the producers?
Generally, it hasn't been a big issue. What I would like to see, and we might go into this later, but we are still living in such a spreadsheet world. Like, it's insane, right? Coming from the Ivy League and the top tier technology hubs of the world, right? We're just like, wow, the world's so advanced. Everyone has reproducible scripts. Everyone knows this and that. And and then you get out there in the world and you're like, oh my gosh, some of these largest companies are giving us spreadsheets. Like, who from a data quality control, like, how do you know someone didn't mess with that? I mean, that's just a simple question. And then how do you know? And a lot of the times, I will say, in the perfect scenario, right, in an agricultural system, you'd have a sensor on a tractor that goes into the cloud, right? And then we have that access on that same platform to then provide verification, certification that goes directly into the quantification platform, right? And then again, we quantify, or we certify or verify. And we're there. I mean, we have parts of that, but in the end, some of this is still a spreadsheet download, right? And so we have a lot of progress to be made. And having these multiple, this is just an issue across sustainability agriculture in particular, is you have so many different platforms, and how do we get them all communicating and talking to one another and streamlined? And so that's that, as you see, and you probably are already experiencing this in your careers, has been a challenge in this space.
Yeah, I know we kind of alluded to this, but it's, this is across industries, coming a little bit more from the financial sector, being in Sloan, and I was hoping you could talk more from a manager perspective. Everyone's good at Excel. Everyone can do a spreadsheet. But going forward, you really need to understand, at the very minimum, some SQL knowledge, having some aspect of SQL. I'm not going to push it to Python, but it's probably going to be important for dynamic data, as everything's built on some API. And having this spreadsheet static data is just going to be antiquated.
Yeah.
Or do you disagree? I mean,
so I will say, we do not all need to be the data scientists in the room. So I have 2 points. One, everyone should know a bit of coding on something, right? At this point, there's not really an excuse. We have so many tools in front of us. Knowing something, just enough to be a smart partner and communicator with the people that know a lot. Okay, so I was telling Sam, I was like, yeah, a lot of my spatial statistics that I'm doing and that I've done in agricultural settings, it's an R. And he's like, oh. Right, okay. All right, I understand there's some huge limitations, but there's also some really nice packages and a group of scientists who use that tool to drive these insights. But with that being said, that gives enough working knowledge to then translate into other approaches and to be a smart partner. So that's where I encourage you all to say, What kind of knowledge do I just need to get into enough so that I'm a smart partner and a smart collaborator, and not being afraid. By the way, I entered into a PhD not even knowing what a model was. Like, I can't believe they accepted me. I mean, I must have talked my way out of that one. But so getting a bit uncomfortable, and I'm still not, right? I'm still not the best modeler out there. Like, that's not me. I didn't get a modeling job. Maybe if I really wanted to, I could probably figure it out and be fine, but that was not really me. And so, but it's getting that skill to be a smart partner.
Right. It's understanding how the dashboards are formed, I imagine, whether it be Power BI or Looker, one of the like. Kind of still on this macro aspect, could we talk a little bit about careers if someone wanted to get into sustainability, and whether it's from a hardcore data scientist want to just be coding all day, or it's from more of a project manager, advisor? Can we talk about some of the opportunities?
Yeah. So I started the PhD knowing I wanted to go into industry, okay, and having that role, having an industry job. But like you said, are you going to be the data scientist?
Yeah.
Are you going to be the project manager? Are you going to be like, oh, okay, my goal is to be the chief sustainability officer, but how do you get there? So a couple points that I think really helped me during that time, and which I'm sure many of you are already doing. If you didn't know, conferences that are very expensive that maybe school hasn't paid for or you don't want to pay for, oftentimes they'll let you in if you volunteer for free, okay? And you get to know, one, the organizers, which know a lot of people, and then you also get to be there for free. So I did a lot while I was in the PhD. I did a lot of, when I could, I mean, that takes time and resources as well, but trying to volunteer and get to know the network and trying to understand where are people in the company? Where's the entry point? If this is maybe where I want to go, how can I get there? The other aspect is entrepreneurship. A lot of you are also thinking about startups, or even already deep into your work in your startups. But that entrepreneurship journey has really helped me out. So initially I was preparing for a low carbon grains startup during that program, and I went through all the customer discovery, and that kind of forced me to have those conversations with the decision makers of these very large companies. Decided that's not what I wanted to pursue. There wasn't really a there the way I was thinking about it. However, that built out a lot of connections, and then I thought, I'm gonna do some independent consulting here, because there's a lot of companies or financial groups that need that knowledge of and expertise of agricultural systems. And so that's what I did. I worked as an independent consultant for a bit. One of my clients, FoodChain ID, which I like them, but I never heard of that world. They offered the full-time role. I was like, but I'm glad I took it, and it's been really, really interesting. And now I'm communicating with multiple chief sustainability officers, and they're not always called chief I mean, it could be the VP of sustainability or technical director, right? But essentially individuals in that role for multiple companies, which is really, really interesting. And you kind of actually get to hear a little bit of the back end of these companies. A lot of these, and I don't know why this is, there tends to be decent turnover in this role, like 2, 3, 4 years in some of these roles. And so oftentimes we have these people, maybe the last person in that role 4 years ago led the target development for 2025, 2030. And now a new person in that role just showed up. It's like, oh, now what? Like, now we have to roll. And there's a lot of pressure on these folks to figure it out. So that's where we come in and help from the advisory arm, because there's some real challenges and around the agriculture food systems. It's really complex.
How do you filter through, either people looking for jobs, or I'm sure you come across plenty of startups? How do you filter and weigh the cost-benefit analysis, and what advice could you give to someone in a sustainability-focused startup?
I will say that we are always eager to take on interns, to looking at contractors, and thinking about, is there a project that maybe you could plug into in a certain way? So please, let's connect. I'm excited to meet you all. You all have a specialty that I'm probably sure could be plugged into our group at some point. Maybe not right now. Maybe might not be a project, but we're growing, we're expanding, and would love to connect with you all. As far as who we like to hire for either part-time or contractor roles or for full-time roles, is just a hunger to figure it out. Like, there's just so much in this space I don't know, and I have to go home and just read the documents no one else wants to read, and try to figure it out, and then call a buddy, and just that hunger to try, because this space is moving so quickly. And I was telling you, on a previous call, I have a day where I'm on the call with cotton systems in India, and then the next call is with cacao systems in Brazil, and the next call we're jumping into olives in Italy, and then and so when we're thinking about these diverse cropping systems and geographies, there's just so much to know and to connect the dots around.
Very interesting. I'm gonna throw another really hard question because bad interviewer, but where is the field heading what do you see in terms of sustainability? Have there been actual impact? Have companies actually changed, or has it been really just more towards a profit maximization? And where do you see it changing most in the next, 5, 10 years?
Yes, it has been changing. And I mean, every day there's news articles on greenwashing and lawsuits. And I'm happy for it, because there has been true greenwashing and real issues where large companies said, we really need a chief sustainability officer. Let's throw our son who just graduated college in the C-suite, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can probably Google that and figure it out.
Yeah.
But that is really, like, we can't do that. Like, if we're going to, not saying that person wasn't appropriate, maybe that person is appropriate, but we really need that thoughtful, real drive and experience in the sustainability area. And some companies are doing better than others. Like I said, we can't expect every company to be here. What we want them is to start and to be ambitious, to keep moving the needle, and to be transparent about it. So like I was saying before, sometimes we're doing audits, and I will say this is a terminology that's kind of helpful, I think is helpful to know. As a verifier and certifier, we do second-party audits and third-party audits. So third-party is when there's a public standard or protocol, and we come in completely. There's the company hiring us. We come in as the third party, and there's that overarching public standard. So we come and do those third-party audits. Companies also have specialty programs and specific goals within their own corporate aims that then we will do second-party audits. So they develop some program on farmer livelihood plus carbon plus water quality, and we'll come in and do second-party audits that essentially say they did what they said they were going to say, or did what they said they were going to do. And some of those are more rigorous than others, let's just say that. But for us, it's as long as they say what they've done, what they've said, and it matches the claims, that's where we can put our stamp on it and say, this is legitimate. So because these companies we're getting closer and closer to their target dates, there's more and more greenwashing, public greenwashing claims being called out. These companies, I think, are really starting to get serious about making real sustainability progress, which is really, really exciting. That's really good. Like, you want to work for a company or lead a company that really, really cares.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, like, what's the purpose, right? So that's been, I think, really refreshing. And I think that's why there's also been some movement in these positions in the past couple years. So I would be interested to see, maybe people are going to kind of hold their ground a little bit more in their current roles, because they feel that they're really supported by corporate and the board, and to move their sustainability activities forward in a genuine way.
Other than greenwashing, do you see any other major hurdles of these, usually 2030, 2035 goals, whether it be data, whether it be technology, which I can't necessarily imagine, or is it really just greenwashing and having people actually commit to sustainability?
I think the companies that are really trying have developed great pilots in the past couple years, and it's worked well, but it's been their baby. They've needed so much support and hand-holding. They've spent so much money on external consultants coming in, supporting farmers financially to motivate them initially and help take the risk off. And they have this program that worked, but now they're saying, dang, to meet our ambitions here, we need to scale this across the entire company, across this entire sourcing shed. Like, how do we do that without that equivalent spend? And that's a really hard question. So it's not easy, and it does require a large investment from the leadership of the company and the board to say, we're truly behind this. Let's make it happen.
There's also a sensitivity aspect to it, I'm sure, right? There are companies, you have to build trust within these companies to say this sensitive information, because you're going to be dealing with not only the raw data of the land, but probably financial data, and combining a lot. What is the aspect of building trust, and how is that going to help, grow the sustainability initiative? This data trust.
Yeah, getting back to the data and the data trust. The transparency really helps. So one of the aspects with the offset market, so your carbon registries, is well, I shouldn't say everything. I wish everything was public, every, right, like it's not. But there's a bit, arguably at this point, there's a bit more transparency in that process. Things are available, more so than your scope 3. Your scope 3, that's even right now for scope 3, again, scope 3 being your sourcing, your emissions throughout your suppliers, all the way from the source. You have, there aren't clear guidelines or requirements around audits and around second, third party audits coming in. And so you can not only you really don't need to publish it anywhere. Now, generally publicly held companies will of course have more transparency because of regulatory matters. But again, you don't necessarily need to have that third party come in and audit. And so there's I think there's a ways to go around that. And once and just thinking about trust, and then the consumers are requiring more and more trust and transparency from these companies too.
But that's somewhat where you come in, right? Your company, you build trust with consumers and provide that value too. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to?
Yeah, I mean, that's the role of certifications. It's meant to say, yes, this has been certified, that this food is X. Certifications aren't perfect. So let me give you an example. So regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture is the idea that we continue to improve and regenerate the agricultural systems that we're in. So instead of degrading the system or maintaining a status quo, we're actually improving a series of outcomes around soil health, water quality, biodiversity. Others define it in other outcomes as well and provide metrics around that. Certifications essentially say, if you've done X, you're good enough and you can get the certification, right? They're typically more, the way they've been developed historically, are more of a binary, which is very difficult to then encourage people to go above and beyond. So this has been a classic issue in organic certifications. You can be organic, but you might not be regenerative. You can have a highly monocropped, no crop rotations, limited residue returns. You can have these systems that are organic, but are actually environmentally aren't scoring so well.
Or even welfare-wise. I know in like North Carolina, they have the layer hens are stacked up, just kind of pooping on each other, but they're fed organic feed. And so you have organic eggs, which again, issue with the organic process. But
yeah, so these aren't perfect, but in the end, it does provide a layer of transparency.
Exactly.
And the idea is that these standards can then they're public, so consumers could read them and see, does this make sense to me or not? I don't think many do, but it's out there.
But having an extra layer such as Food ID and providing that certification builds a little more consumer trust. But it's also with Food ID to build that company trust with them. Is that a fair relationship? If like a triangle between, the company, Food ID, the consumer? Is that
Yes.
a bad way to look at that?
No, I think that's fair. So FoodChain ID, so we have a variety. So think of your fast food companies. We do food safety and quality or food safety as well. So we might be going and testing chicken nuggets and taking it to our food safety labs. And we might have this long history of trust from a food safety perspective.
Mhm.
But then they're saying, well, now we'd like to maybe you might be a good player for us to provide us sustainability services. And so that's kind of where that trust, because their trust, if we put our good to go stamp on it, they're trusting us that we've done our job. And if there is an issue, right, if we're doing a food safety and there's an issue, like they want to know about it. These companies don't do food safety audits because well, yes, they do it because it's required. Yes, there is some regulatory, but also it's a huge business risk. If there is an issue and there's human health issues and lawsuits, and then they have to close the plant down. I mean, that's a huge business hit. So same thing for sustainability. It's not just about, yes, they want to do well and they want to get that stamp, but it's good for business. If they're making the claims, they need to be able to back up those claims. And if they have some type of supplier that's doing something crazy, they want to know about it.
Interesting, because then you have to, if you're dealing with, let's say, the parent company, you have to have access to every subsidiary, correct?
Mhm.
Go all the way back and have to map. I mean, I'm sure it's case by case dependent, but we were talking about where do you draw the line of like where does it stop of how much you're tracking all the way through the entire supply chain and from plate all the way back to live animal or from in the ground to plate. It's
So some of you might be aware of that the EU has a deforestation-free regulation coming up at the end of the year. And companies are like, oh, okay, we're all about this. This aligns really, this is an example of one. This aligns really well with our targets. Great, like what crops are you sourcing from that fall under this regulation? Oh, okay, soy and palm oil. Okay, great, okay. Where are your supply sheds? Well, we buy from this aggregator in this country, in this country, in this country, but they won't tell us who they buy from. Right? And this is a protection because that big company could just overstep that aggregator. So they're protecting their business. And so this is where we can come in and we do help with that supply chain mapping because we can come in as that third party. That's of course in our advisory consulting arm. Come in as the third party and say, there's a little bit, sometimes it's still a challenge because we don't have that relationship with those suppliers or those aggregators, but there's at least a degree of separation that can help us map and help us map the supply chain of some of these companies. But that's an example of a regulation that's, I think it's needed. It's at the right time, but also. And by the way, has trickle-down effects because if a company is already doing it for imports into imports into Europe, then they're not just gonna generally just do that for that supply chain. Even if they're exporting to the US or somewhere else in the world, they generally implement these programs across their whole company, which is actually really, really exciting, but it's also really, really challenging.
Are you part of regulatory talks or even on the local, state, federal level, or
Yes.
kind of just play it by whatever gets passed?
No, we are involved in these regulatory conversations, both from methodology development, from the voluntary standards and initiatives, and regulatory in different parts of the world. Of course, we're coming in as another stakeholder.
Yeah.
But our role as a verifier is very unique. We're not a supplier. We're not a food company. But our role and how and this is often our flag is like, hey, you might be doing great things, but says who, right? That's where we want that say of okay, we need to there needs to be some assurance as part of this program. It doesn't need to be us, but there needs to be an assurance.
I think it could be time for, I don't know where Jen is. But first I want to thank Emily for coming. And then I'm going to open up for Q&A. Is that okay with you? Thank you so much.
Q&A?
open up for, is that okay with you?
Yes. I have many questions. So I want to introduce myself. I'm new here. I'm a visiting scholar from the University of Copenhagen, and I'm in J1. And I have been doing research on different sustainability standards for like about 10 years. So I'm very happy to hear you talk. And I have two questions, right? So the first one, it seems that you have hinted that you are also certifying the standards, meaning you're like a third party verifier or auditor, so that you can issue certificates if the requirements of some standards have been met. But at the same time, you are involved in developing specific standards. So isn't that like a little bit of a conflict?
Yes, if the same people and entities are doing that work.
Yeah.
So FoodChain ID is the umbrella company, and we have multiple subsidiaries within that, and particularly as we have what we call certification bodies within various locations. These certification bodies are the ones that actually carry out all audits, so certification verification. Our advisory arm is with our global group, and there is no connection between those people, so no people overlap, and those are completely separate. And that's really important. And our competitors do that as well. So our competitors also have that advisory arm and then completely separate verification, certification. And by the way, we're audited. If we want to keep our accreditation, we need to make sure that that is the case. And that's a huge, that's something we're super careful of, because if there's any conflict, right, not good. That needs to be really separate.
Yeah, I have a second question, if that's not a problem. You seem to hint that you sit on a lot of data. So I was wondering if you do research on your own for some internal problems and kind of some internal improvement, or you involve researchers, and because many different impacts would be estimated based on your data.
Yes, we don't do that. Data that we have generally has very clear use cases and it's owned by our customers. So we don't have much, we can't do much with it. I will say from a separate perspective, we hire a lot of our team are PhD researchers, because a lot of statistics and the data use cases does need that expertise to understand the data and the quality and the use case.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Stephanie. I'm a second-year MBA. Maybe tapping a little bit into your crop science background. I'm just curious as to what you've noticed trending maybe in the fertilizer space, organic fertilizers, what that looks like. I feel like that's like kind of up and coming, especially when it comes to yield with crops. Just curious as to your observations, what you've seen, certifications there, anything like that.
Yeah, so really exciting work around inhibitors, so N2O, nitrous oxide inhibitors, and nitrogen fertilizer. We have phosphorus fertilizers being derived from wastewater. There's so many different startups and initiatives around this. And so what's very interesting is these companies who've, and maybe this is even speaking like kind of directly to you, is these companies who've developed an innovative product in the fertilizer space or improved management application technology algorithms. They have a sustainability claim, and what they need is a way to bring that to market that sustainability claim. Yes, and they might be improving yields and having these benefits for farmers that the farmers care about, but is there also a layer of claim that they can make, that a company can make a scope 3 claim from that, or are there offsets, opportunities? Couple things. There's some there's some new registries, or one in particular, check them out. It's called Proba. It's a registry based out of the Netherlands. They are doing some very interesting methodology development for offsets around clean fertilizer production as well. Yeah, and some other related areas. And yes, there's an exciting, and same thing with enteric methane reduction in cattle. So there's companies making feed additives or developing feed additives, right? A ton of R&D for the purpose of decreasing methane emissions, but how can they really incentivize that? And there are methodologies. Vera has a methodology, VM41. There's other methodologies out there, but also, again, there's still this need to look at how those sustainability improvements can actually be brought to market.
Yeah.
I'm interested, I know you mentioned, like dealing with all the spreadsheets or the more manual data entry of clients. Is there like some specific hurdle or limitation that the industry isn't advancing as much with, like, I guess, the more efficient data management? Or some obstacle that you think it's struggling with, compared to other industries?
It's hard to pinpoint that exactly. You know, in the food and ag sector, there's so many subcategories to that, and there's so many different nuances. I don't think I could pin that down on maybe what the issue is. But generally, I would say it's the language everyone knows. So even if they're using platforms, a variety of platforms to collect and manage the data, sometimes it still comes in or out on a spreadsheet.
Is it more like manual data entry at the farmer level, or is the data?
Sometimes manual, sometimes automated. And that depends. And a lot of that is geography, cropping system dependent too. We work with a lot of specialty crops. So think coffee, cocoa, spices. A lot of that is smallholder systems. So you have companies also driving data from smallholder systems, which they're not going to have the equipment implements that they would in the US, like in the Midwest.
They have, I was thinking, I've been to some of the Wisconsin dairies where they have cow collars and can track all the nutrients, all these different metrics on cows, and it goes right into a snowflake, it goes into the database, and they're able to share it via Snowflake, and they're doing some pretty advanced stuff in that regard. But I would also say just every industry is siloed in a lot of ways with data.
That's a good point. There are some industries that are much further along. So I would say like poultry as well, and you have your main grain commodities. You have so there's certain industries and sectors that are more advanced, and they'd hear me say that and be quite insulted, I think. But I'm speaking largely across the globe and across farming size, enterprises, and cropping systems. And when you open it up that broad, it is majority spreadsheet world.
Yeah.
Gerardo, PhD in entrepreneurship innovation from Italy. And I have a question a curiosity related to a technology in particular, the blockchain. My curiosity is how much this technology is used in supply chain, and how it can really improve the credibility in data.
Yes, whenever we have a client that says they've set up a blockchain system, we're like, yes. Right, it's the future. It's the future when it comes to traceability. We now need to know if something was grown on a plot of land, and whether half of it went to, let's say, wheat, and half of it went to crackers, and half of it went to a beer. Right, we need to know, and these companies have various requirements that they want to report on. That should be tracked back to that plot of land. And so the requirements that the industry and regulatory and voluntary are now requiring, and the level of detail of the plot is going to move this direction more and more towards blockchain and traceability. That's what I'm seeing and excited about. Again, it has some ways to go, but a very exciting direction.
Any other questions? Oh.
Perhaps not directly related to the work you do, but related in terms of kind of the proliferation of standards that we're seeing, especially in the food and agriculture space. I guess in a business-to-business context, it might not be as much of a problem, and you know exactly what they're referring to. But on the consumer side, it might be confusing for people to understand exactly what's going on. Are you seeing any kind of consensus around standards that companies are looking to meet, or is it still pretty distributed across the space?
Still a lot of options out there for companies and then consumers. There is a large initiative, it's called the SAI platform, where multiple I think over 200 CPG companies have gotten together, and they're looking to standardize this particularly around regenerative agriculture. That's one area that's a lot of different options out there for consumers. They're looking to standardize it. Exciting progress, but it's slow. When you're trying to get consensus across the industry, that's really, really, really hard, and it takes a long time. So feeling positive about that. They're doing really good work, but it is slow. And I do think it's needed.
Do you see any cost barriers with that in your work? And I'm just going from my perspective. So, small local family farm can deliver meat. We've never been organic. We've never invested that capital because we weren't really big enough. And although we do no hormones, no antibiotics, completely grass-fed, free range, everything, how does a consumer, we don't have any certifications, could be the best product in the world, but there's a cost barrier to that.
There is a cost, and a lot of these smaller farmers and will come together. Will either come together in a co-op or perhaps a company identifies these farms and this supply shed and groups them together to make it feasible and help subsidize and support. So that is a component. The other component that we're seeing and not really a part of, but you have in that case, you have oftentimes farms directly building respect and trust with their consumers. So it's almost like they're building the brand. They're using social media. They're using their local networks to build that brand and trust because of the local proximity. So we're kind of, again, that's not really our space, but that is something that is good to see.
Perfect.
Is like the main motivation for these companies is part of that, like you show the data from the consumer side and in terms of their purchasing habits, or is it more government regulation and their target goals? How does that stakeholder relationship work? Are you trying to motivate them to get verification, or are they really used to need you?
No, they come to us. They come to us. They see a business case behind it. So sustainability is a business case. These certifications are a business case. They see that they can have a value add, an additional margin on their products with these certifications. And so they're coming to us. Sometimes there's some education going on of like what's possible for them, because there might be something also they could add on or something that might be better suited. But generally they're coming to us. And again, how they come to those conclusions, it depends, but that's the way the direction typically works.
So I think we're at time for the end of the program, but I wanted to put one more question out to you, Emily. So you mentioned there might be some opportunities for students at FoodChain ID. Are you open to students connecting with you on LinkedIn? Is there a preferred way for folks to communicate with you?
Yes, please find me on LinkedIn. This name is long, which means if you search it, I should come up. So yes, please find me, connect on LinkedIn. Let's stay connected. I know you all are somewhere and going somewhere, and even if we're in parallel industries, let's connect and learn from each other. And yeah, that would be great. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you both for facilitating this conversation, and thank you all for joining.
So